Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Dusan Matic, and I would like to welcome you all to the webinar Love and Mental Health, organized by MCS Language Solutions. Before we start, let me tell you that due to the size of the group attending the webinar sessions, the microphone and the webcam functions will not be enabled. If you have any technical difficulties, please type in the chat box below. However, if you have any questions regarding the content of the webinar, please type your questions in the Q&A box below, and our guest speaker will try to answer them at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded, but without any information about attendees. That means that your personal information will not be recorded. The recording of the webinar will be posted on MCS Language Solutions YouTube channel. So let us begin. To what extent does love influence our mental health? Research shows that love and compassion are crucial for our mental health. From our attachment to our parents and caregivers, to our experiences of romantic love, and finally, our compassion for others, love influences our sense of self and our life meaning. The goal is to balance the flow between giving and receiving. Love contributes to our well-being and the well-being of people in our life. In this workshop, we will discuss strategies for developing a healthy, loving connection to ourselves and others. Our guest speaker is brilliant Bianca Briciu. She's an assistant professor at the School of Transformative Leadership and Spirituality, St. Paul University. She teaches courses in emotional and spiritual intelligence, positive psychology, mindfulness, and leadership. Bianca is also a certified coach in emotional intelligence and the founder of Emotional Balance. Her passion is to help people integrate intellect and emotions in order to experience well-being, wisdom, and compassion. So welcome again, Bianca. We are so happy to have you again.
Thank you so much, Dushan, for this beautiful introduction and for the brilliant adjective. I really appreciate it, and I did not expect it. But I want to welcome all of you who joined us here, and to thank you for investing your time in understanding more about the relationship between love and mental health, because they are in an interdependent relationship, right? So you may wonder, do we have mental health because we have love in our life, or are we able to feel love because we have a good level of mental health? So I will start my presentation. I wanted to start with a very definition of mental health, and also to relate it a little bit to the times we are experiencing right now. In the definition of mental health, I want to specify three specific areas. So if you think about the analogy of mental health and physical health, when is the body healthy? And the body is healthy when we eat well, when we exercise, when we clean the body, when we have a healthy environment, right? So we have a lot of different aspects of maintaining our physical health. And with the mental health is very similar. We need certain things that contribute to our mental health. So I want to highlight a little bit, what are those things that we need for mental health? And I will refer to three very important aspects of mental health. One is the state of our mind. And by mind, I understand, how our thoughts, emotions, and sensations, perceptions function, right? And this is a very big and deep area of psychology. But the state of our mind can be in a relative state of balance. We feel that we have agency, right? We have a certain degree of control over our lives. We have a good sense of self-awareness, and there are many aspects of the health of our state of mind. I will not go into a lot of depth here. The second aspect of mental health is the state of our relationships, right? So we tend to think that mental health only means the health of our, psychological inner makeup. But in fact, mental health is also related to the state of our relationships. So to the extent in which we can feel love, empathy, and compassion, both in the giving of these aspects and in the receiving, right? So these love, empathy, and compassion as forms of healthy exchanges with others. And you may have noticed, for example, the extent in which conflict or abandonment or betrayal or rejection can really impair our mental health and good functioning. And the third aspect of mental health is the state of our work and the culture in which we belong, to the extent in which we feel that we contribute, we feel that we are in the right place. So a sense of having a sense of meaning and purpose, right? And this is more related to what we call in our university spirituality, right? So connecting to our meaning and purpose, that doesn't have a religious sense, but more a sense of connecting to our own deep meaning. So some of the good mental health habits that have been highlighted by many psychologists are mindfulness, meditation. Some of you may already practice a daily, or you may have a daily mindfulness practice, balancing activity with relaxation. And we have seen the danger that many of us are facing now with working from home, when we start working even more than the 8 hours and we leave very little time for relaxation, which usually happens in front of a screen. So again, it's not a really deep relaxation. It's only relaxation of the body. Expressing our needs and creativity is another aspect of mental health. Solving conflict, forgiving people who may have hurt us, or working on forgiveness, in whatever form that may come. Sense of meaning and direction, love and connection, and cultivating happiness. So I want to ask you at this moment the extent to which you think that love contributes to your mental health. So I'm sharing here the poll, and I will invite you to choose one of the three. So you have less than 50%, more than 50%, about 50%, the half and half. I was curious to see if there is a correlation between what I say and what you feel in your own lives, because I think it's important to move from just the theory in psychology to our subjective sense of experience. Okay, so I see that many of you, and I'm going to share the results. Many of you have chosen more than 50%, right? So it almost seems that love and connection form an even bigger extent to which we find mental health and well-being, or we experience them, versus other aspects of mental health. So thank you very much for answering these. And I will move on now to our experience of the pandemic, right? Because we cannot just talk about mental health in general, since these are very specific, unusual, and many people say unprecedented times. Many people experience anxiety around their health nowadays. They worry also about the health of their loved ones. We experience isolation and a sense of loneliness and powerlessness. So at this time, we have lost our usual coping mechanisms, right? Many of us have created in our lives a set of routines and habits that allow us to stay mentally healthy, but now a lot of things have changed in our lives. So we see ourselves, at least many of us, in a state of chaos that we try to manage in different ways, and that can create a lot of suffering and inner turmoil. We also experience the fear of our mortality and vulnerability connected with uncertainty about the future. So one of the very strong drives of our minds is to have certainty, right? And to know what is going to happen, which we don't, right? In many different ways. I've also heard Gabor Mate, a specialist in trauma and addiction, talking about the fact that the collective trauma of the pandemic, which is now on a global scale, activates our own individual traumas. So on top of the anxiety and the uncertainty and the fears that we feel about our present times, a lot of us, as we are sent into isolation and we lose our coping mechanisms, we also start feeling a lot of inner things that we may have repressed or we may have tried to forget. And now it seems that they are again activated because we are not as busily involved in certain activities. So many people feel now that they are between a rock and a hard place, right? You're afraid to go out because you fear about your health and you're afraid to meet people. But at the same time, feeling isolated makes you feel anxious or depressed or many other um, aspects of imbalance in our mental health. And Esther Perel, who is a specialist in relationships and a psychologist and a sexologist, she talks about the lockdown as a relationship accelerator. The fact that people who had fairly good relationships, their relationships are even stronger now. And people who had difficult relationships, they are even more difficult nowadays because they are all the time together and they don't have other means of um, I shouldn't say escape, but other means of connecting to others. So in terms of how important is love for mental health, right? So there was an 80% agreement that for you, love was very important for mental health. We have these different aspects of love, right? So when we talk about love, we immediately connect it with romantic love and our partner in usually in marriage. Um, but there are other forms of love that contribute to our mental health as well. And I see romantic love as one of the most powerful, most important aspects of love. So we have the experience of falling in love, which is a peak of happiness, vitality, and connection, a sense of power and well-being. But this is short-lived. We have the second aspect, which is love for family members and friends. It's an ongoing state of connection, intimacy, and empathy. We feel valued, we feel supported, we feel that we belong, right? So I talked before about belonging. And the third one is compassion for the self and others, which is what we call a more spiritual type of love, witnessing and accepting all parts of yourself, including the ones that you don't like, and doing the same with other people. And this is the goal of many contemplative practices, if you think about it. So the quality, presence, or absence of love is crucial to our mental health. And social isolation is the highest indicator of depression and anxiety. So I wanted to talk very briefly about the fact that due to our over idealization of romantic love in the Western culture, a lot of people feel very disempowered if they don't have a partnered relationship and they don't value as much other types of other forms of love and connection, right? So we created this myth of the ultimate happiness, right? Think about all the stories in the films that you're seeing, starting with the Disney animated movies that talk about the he and the she who met and they got together and then they lived happily ever after, right? This is one of our strongest myths in the Western culture. And a lot of people are in the search for that. And some of them are disappointed because the happily ever after seems to be different than what we expected, right? So there is this idea that I will be happy when I meet the perfect partner, when I meet my soulmate. And we fail to appreciate the extent to which love is also a personal capacity. It's not only an experience that gets activated when we meet the right person, but it's a constant heart-based interaction with the world, right? And it's also a form of action. So how we behave with others and how others behave towards us. So what is interesting, and a lot of psychiatrists and neurologists talk about the extent to which our very brain is influenced by the quality of the relationships that we have. And I'm quoting here, our nervous system is affected by those closest to us and synchronizes with them in a way that has profound implications for personality and lifelong emotional health. I found it really fascinating that when they did research about, for example, married couples living together, um, they are regulating one another's bodily functions, right? Even the rhythm of the beating of the heart tends to sort of synchronize when people stay together for a long time. And the brain waves that we experience also um, tend to change according to the type of relationships that we have. So the the vision or the perception that we have about love is very much influenced by our first experiences of love and attachment. So the first idea that we as human beings got about love and relationships is very much connected to our experience of being born completely helpless, and our parents or some other people, our caregivers, being completely in charge of all our needs. So if our entry into the world was met with caring and love, we develop neurons for connections, for connection, safety, and calm. And we see dependency on others as being good, and we trust that other people will respond to us. So the quality of caregiving that we received has two main outcomes: a sense of self-worth and personal value. So if our parents enjoyed our presence or loved us or appreciated us being with them, we tend to get the idea that, oh, I'm an important person. I matter. I am worthy. People give me attention and love. Because as a baby, the way we love is completely different than what we define as love. And the second outcome is the trust that others will respond to our needs. So if we had healthy relationships in our family, we trust people more and we see love as a positive experience versus, so for example, children who have been neglected, or children whose parents had mental health problems or various other problems and could not really pay good quality of attention to their baby, they tend to have a sense of mistrust in the world, and to have a deep belief that the universe is something that you should not trust and open yourself to. The second source of our, or how we define and how we feel love, is the accumulation of our love experiences throughout our life. So every positive experience that you had reinforces our ability to love, and every negative experience reinforces our mistrust of love. Right? We have this phrase, heartbreak, that usually lasts for a certain amount of time when people go through a very difficult breakup. And every difficult breakup creates for us a certain amount of difficulty in the way we experience the next love relationship in our life. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about the association between love and mental health. So we all talk about love as being very important in our life, but most of us, and I'm not making accusations, including me and including a lot of people I know, we take love for granted, right? It's like the air. Once you have a relationship, once you have a family, it's just supposed to be there, and we go about our daily life and our work and our worries and our things, and we don't pay a lot of attention to opening our heart more, to experiencing intimacy more, to move away from the screens and have an intimate, deep, fulfilling conversation with our partner or our children. Right? So this is important to think about, especially nowadays when, as we are isolated at home, we tend to spend a lot of time in front of screens, parents working and children, working themselves or playing. So I'm just going to talk about two forms of mental health imbalance because they are the most common and also the most easily treatable, unless, well, I just said that, but depression, like deep depression, is not very easily treatable. So I take that back. They are at their early stages easily treatable. So anxiety implies a fear of future events, including the loss of love. So we keep having obsessive thoughts that prevent connection. Sometimes even worrying a lot about your loved ones prevent you from being loving to them. I've seen many instances where parents scold the children, or we call our parents, for those of us who are immigrants in Canada, calling our parents and scolding them for going out too much and putting themselves in danger. We show our love in that way, but that is love associated with anxiety, and it's not a very heart-feeling manifestation of love. Depression, on the other hand, is our grief or mourning, a loss of love sometimes, or other important parts of our lives. So sometimes even the experience of immigration can lead to depression because we mourn the disconnection with our family of origin. And it leads to a loss of meaning and a loss of ability to connect to other people. Now, what is interesting about both anxiety and depression is that the more we experience them, the less we are able to feel love, the less we are able to give and to receive love. So we become numb to love, right? So, and it's very, how should I say, it's ironic because love is that ingredient in our mental health that could help alleviate our anxiety, because love is very soothing, and even hugging and touching our loved ones or talking to them leads to that calm and sense of safety and soothing. And depression, again, when we feel the connection with others, we tend to find more meaning in our lives versus feeling disconnected and feeling meaninglessness and emptiness in our life. So I wanted to ask you another question. Now that you told me how important love was in your life, I wanted to ask about the amount of attention and effort that you are putting into love and connection. So in your daily life, how much time and connection, how much time and attention do you give to cultivating love and connection? So you're welcome. I invite you to answer the poll. So how long do you focus on, having conversations with your loved ones, doing something for them? What other ways are in which you manifest your love for your loved ones? Calling them. And I also added that question, what do you mean cultivating love and connection? Because it's not something that we commonly do to cultivate love, right? As I said, it's like the air that we breathe. It should be there. We suffer if it's not there, but we don't know how to produce it. Like, how can we intentionally create more love around us? So I see from the poll that I will just wait a few more seconds, and if you could please answer, that would be great. And I'm very happy to see the results of, I'm going to share them with you now. So I hope that many of you had a chance to share. And I see that many of you spend about 2 hours a day cultivating love and connection, which is amazing, right? Because according to a study I've read recently in a psychological study, people spend very little time in that, intimacy and togetherness and so on. I think it was very small amount. It was about 30 hours a month or something like that. But I see that maybe that explains why you also wanted to take part in the love and mental health, because you are interested in ways to cultivate love and connection as aspects of mental health. So thank you for sharing that, and I congratulate you for. I'm trying to think: do I spend 2 hours a day in love and connection, or cultivating love and connection? Probably, yeah. I would say it's about this amount. So I will talk very briefly, right? Just to mention a little bit what depression and anxiety is, and then how we can use love to undo the damaging effects of depression and anxiety. So depression is one of the leading causes of disability, and it leads to a loss of interest in life and its activity. So it's almost a sort of what we call, in its utmost most powerful manifestation, a retreat from life, right? It's almost like we remove ourselves from the usual rhythm of life. And sometimes it can be associated with life transitions, right? When we need a time to retreat and reflect, and but sometimes it can turn into a form of mental health symptom. The causes can be genetic, biological, personality related, or environment related. And by environment, I mean the experiences that we have. And a recent study shows that 13% of people in Canada experience depression. So the numbers have doubled with the pandemic. And what is also important to know is that almost half of those who feel that they have suffered from depression or anxiety have never gone to see a doctor. So these statistics refer to people who actually went to look for help, but there are many people who don't really refer to the symptoms of depression as depression because of various cultural stigmas about mental health, and they don't look for help when they experience that. They find different coping mechanisms that are not always healthy. Anxiety is a stress response to both real and imagined situations. And I think this is almost common sense nowadays, that when we are anxious, we are in a constant state of stress, right? Our body is pumped with cortisol and other stress hormones that put us in a constant state of agitation, right? And anxiety increased with the pandemic, and nowadays 22% of Canadians, even more than people who experience depression, experience anxiety. Now, in its early stages, anxiety can be sort of managed with emotion regulation and mindfulness practice. Now, after the talk, if you're curious, you can access Robert Sapolsky. He is a specialist at Stanford University in stress responses and how our mind, and this is an important thing to understand, that even when a stressful situation has ended, our mind continues to recreate the stress, right? So by replaying the story of something fearful, we maintain ourselves in a fearful state, even when the danger has passed. And you can, I will not go now into a deep discussion of how our experience of the pandemic leads to anxiety that keeps feeding on itself, right? And sometimes the danger is real, and sometimes the danger is imagined. Like we keep projecting, about the future. So the stress and isolation also make connection and love difficult, right? So our pressures at work, our responsibility and life hardships lead to a slow closing of the heart. And I find that really important to know that an open heart, and I'm using the metaphor, right? It's obviously a metaphor of open and closed heart. But when we become very stressed, when we become anxious or depressed, we close our heart and we stop feeling love and connection, right? We live in, like, it's almost like living in a little box, and there is no exchange between us and others, or very little exchange that is not really contributing sufficiently to our mental health. So other factors that lead to stress are uncertainty, lack of information, lack of control, inability to express ourselves, right? So if you look at all these factors, we all experience stress on a daily basis. And with the isolation, we become focused on problems and fears with too little time given to the art of love sharing, right? And we leave very little time for meaningful presence. And meaningful presence is when we try to disconnect ourselves from the stress, from anxiety, from things that really trouble us, and just focus on the presence of the other person, right? So that's what I mean by being fully present, and giving attention to the person who is in front of us without having a phone in our hand, right? So connection restores a sense of flow, it opens the heart, and it contributes in a very strong way to our mental health. And now I'm going to talk about some strategies. I will first talk about two strategies in which we can increase our capacity to receive love, right? Because in many theories of love, or our general understanding of love, it's just something that people give us, right? We want to be loved, we want to be valued, we want to be appreciated, because it's a very deep human need. But to what extent do we give that to others? And that's what I'm going to talk in the next slide. So how we can increase our capacity to receive love. The first one is to cultivate self-compassion. And you heard probably the truism that you need to love yourself in order to be able to experience love. That used to be a sort of pop culture understanding. But if we live in a constant self-criticism or guilt or shame or anxiety or depression, it's very difficult to actually feel love, even when people love us, because we don't notice it. It's like, it doesn't touch us. We are so barricaded inside our worries and our arguments with ourselves that we don't feel it anymore. So how we can cultivate self-compassion is by, one, being kind to yourself. And what I mean is that instead of, so for example, if you experience a negative experience of failure, let's say, addressing your inner world like a caring parent treats a child, instead of saying, God, I'm so stupid, or, oh my God, how could I make that mistake? Trying to address yourself in your inner talk like a parent, like I understand that you were really stressed and maybe it was not good what you did, so talking to yourself with kindness is a way to increase our self-compassion. Talking to people about their inner world and your inner world, right? So taking discussions a little bit deeper to a sense of shared humanity, right? So talking about emotions, talking about desires, talking about fears and different manifestations of our inner world. The third one is accepting our imperfections. A lot of us are really dominated by a sort of idealistic version of ourselves, and we get so critical when we fail to achieve what we wanted, or when where somebody criticizes us because we have not accepted our weaknesses. And it's good to be aware of them. I'm not a very organized person. Okay, maybe I have other qualities that will compensate for that, and just accepting it and not just feeling so embattled about it. And I also created a practice for self-compassion meditation that I did for a period of a few years, because it's a practice that really cultivates a sort of mindfulness of the heart and mindfulness of the love that we feel for others, where we feel it a little bit more strongly by paying attention to it. And The second way in which we can cultivate our ability to receive love is to accept being more vulnerable. And many of you are probably familiar with the work of Brené Brown. Um, she says that the only way love can reach you to the core is when you are vulnerable, right? And there is especially a gender aspect of vulnerability, because vulnerability is the opposite of the definition of masculinity, right? So a lot of men feel fear and shame around vulnerability, which is why, you know, it's very difficult for them to access the world of emotions and to really enjoy that flow of give and take in a love relationship. So now I invite you to another question. I'm just going to the next question. I wanted to ask about your mental health state at present, you know, whether you experience one of the two things I mentioned, depression, anxiety, or you feel that you're in a good state, you feel that you're even thriving. I think that there are few people who feel that they thrive or they flourish at this time, just because of the general perception that there is something transforming at so many different levels. So I invite you to share your answers. And I see that many of you share that you're in a good state, which is really wonderful to see. And I'm going to share the results with you. So as you see, more than half of you are in a good state of mental health, and some other of you experience anxiety or depression. And in many different ways, it's important to understand that we do have the power to contribute to our mental health, the same way we have the power to contribute to the health of our body, unless we are really sick when we need to see a doctor. So it's very important to pay attention to your internal state and understand when is the time to look for help, or when is the time when you need to make some changes in your life in order to help yourself, you know, because what anxiety and depression do with people usually is that they also prevent us from changing things, right? Because they give us a sense of hopelessness or powerlessness, that there's not much that we can do to actually change how we feel, when in fact we don't really know how to change. So thank you for sharing that with everybody. And now I'm going to talk about 4 different ways in which we can cultivate how we give love to others and how we express our love. Because as I said, it's important to remember that love is there, but it can very easily disappear, right? We have this belief in love as always being there, even if we don't show it, even if we don't cultivate it. But a lot of studies show that it doesn't, at least not in romantic partner relationships and friendships as well. So the love can last between parents and children, but not in other forms of love, without us paying attention to it to a certain extent. So one way in which we can increase our capacity to offer love to others is to cultivate mindfulness. By focusing on our well-being, we also contribute to the well-being of the people that we interact with. And this is a major fact, right? A lot of people say, well, I cannot do anything about the world and making the world better. The first gesture in making the world better is reducing your own suffering. Because if you reduce your own suffering, like your own internal suffering, and you can create a state of calm and loving presence, the more you make other people feel good, you nurture them, you encourage them, right? You become this beautiful presence in an interaction. The second way is to set intentions to express love in ways in which you can. So having that at the back of your mind that, oh, it's important to express my love. I really appreciate this person and I'm going to tell them how much I appreciate them. There is a very interesting book for those of you who want to take this further called The 5 Love Languages. And I found that book really revolutionary because it shows that not everybody expresses love or feels love in the same way, right? So the authors talk about very specific ways of manifesting love. So these are the 5 of them. You know, the appreciating words. So when you express your love to someone, they may feel loved if they have this language of love. Right? But if their language of love is, let's say, quality time spent together, praising them does not really open their heart, but spending time with them does open their heart, you know. So it is about this. So the 5 of appreciating words, acts of service, touch, gifts, and quality time spent together. And just by seeing these, you probably have a sense of which language of love you prefer, or which language of love your partner prefers. But this is mostly in romantic relationships and to a certain extent in friendships. And the next 2 ways in which you can increase your ability to offer love to others is asking them, you know, what can I do to make you feel better? So being interested in their well-being and wanting to contribute to their well-being in a very open-minded way, right? So many times we have a certain idea about what is good for a person, right? The classical way is the parent who has this belief that the child really needs to be a doctor. And if the child is not a doctor, then that's the end of the world. And because of that very strong belief, they communicate their love to the son in pushing them to become a doctor, right? So that's the way they manifest their love, but they don't really pay attention to what the son in this example needs, right? So, and what the son desires, and what are the son's talents. Maybe the son does not have a talent for being a doctor, and so on, right? So just paying close attention to what the person needs and being open to that, because sometimes we want to do certain things that people don't need. And then we become resentful that we showed them our love and they did not appreciate it. The fourth and the last one is just a very common sense way in which we can give love, being curious about the soul of the people you love. And by soul, I mean the totality of who they are. Right, so not just wanting them to be the perfect wife, not just wanting them to be the perfect husband or father, but being interested in all aspects of them. You know, what is their creativity? What are their talents? What are their needs? Right, so soul refers to this totality of a person. Right, so asking them meaningful questions and sometimes just talking about these world of the soul. And I think that's important to initiate more discussions like this in love relationships, because sometimes we just remain at the surface. You can, as a result of this talk, you can think more of what are the ways in which you can show love to your loved ones. And I'm going to ask you, I have 2 more questions, and I'm now considering whether I should ask both of them or just one, just because of time, and maybe you have questions at the end. I'm going to finish with this slide. Can love, and this is one of the major questions, can love heal the other? As I said throughout the presentation, love is really an essential aspect of mental health, and mental health in turn makes our ability to give and receive love more, or makes it stronger, turns it into a good, healthy flow. On the other hand, when we already experience mental health issues, can love heal those issues? Right? So many times we have, again, this idea that love can heal everything, and love can just undo so many damages that are being done. So what can you do if your partner, in this case, suffers from depression, addiction, bipolar disorder, OCD, or many other disorders that make the relationship difficult? So there is a danger of fixing, and this is especially important for women to remember, because throughout many centuries, women were the fixers in a way, that they were the managers of emotions in a family. Love can be a catalyst for awareness, and love can be soothing, right? It gives us a good sense of safety and calm, but it is not enough in itself for very deep underlying mental issues, right? Especially like the ones that I mentioned above. And the mental health issues make love difficult because they lead to codependent relationship or to abusive relationships. So codependent relationships are relationships in which one person keeps giving and giving and giving and caring for the other and caring for the other without receiving attention and love back. So there is no mutuality in that relationship, or there is a power relationship. And what can you do in situations like this? One way is to seek professional help, or talk to your partner about seeking professional help. Being supportive of your partner's process or of your process in different cases, but don't make it your job to fix your partner. Right? This is very important to remember, that love has this powerful force, but not in changing the others radically, and really undoing their mental health. It can contribute to their well-being only if they are in a good state of, or in a relatively, let's say, stable mental health state. And if since you attended this talk and you are probably interested in these aspects, it's important to lead by example. To when we feel that there are problems in a relationship, to become grounded ourselves and showing up in the relationship. So to work on ourselves to be better, so that we can be in a better relationship with others. So here I want to end my presentation, and I invite you to ask some questions. If you have some questions, I will allow this time for the questions and not share the poll. And I want to thank you all very much for being with us. And I'm waiting now for some of the questions. You can ask your questions in the chat, and I will be happy. Okay, so I see one question. Can you elaborate on don't make it your job to fix your partner? So when we make it our job to fix our partner, we end up being in a codependent relationship, because we become caregivers in a way, right? So it's not, how should I put it? There is not an equal love relationship anymore, because now we are also in the position of the counselor as well. And that can be very difficult for the person who is in the fixing position, because it can be very frustrating. And I've seen many cases where, let's say, parents or partners try to help people who experience depression or addiction, and they live in a constant suffering, because they show a lot of their love and support, but then nothing changes, right? And love and support are important, but they will not change the mechanism of addiction. They will not change the mechanism of depression. So the person who experiences a mental health issue needs to work on it and experience the support of a loving partner, right? In collaboration with that more what we call professional help or other forms of help, right? Not making the job of the loving person um, to heal the underlying issue. So thank you for your, and okay. So I see, oh, very interesting question. I will refer to children. So what can we do for adult children, or what can we do with our angry sons? I think this is a very, these questions are interrelated in a way. And from what I know and from what I've read, the best thing that we can do for our children is to cultivate our empathy and compassion and be able to listen to them, you know, and pay attention to what they express without reacting, right? Because we are human as parents, we tend to react. When they show anger, we show anger, and then we keep upping the anger, and then they become more angry, and then we become more angry, and then they become even more angry, and then we fight, and each one tries to overpower the other. That leads to very painful conflict. So what specialists in dealing with teenager behaviors say that is that it's very important for parents to have empathy for the wide range of emotions that teenagers feel, because they feel a lot of very painful emotions. They can feel depression, they can feel anger, because they are in a state of transformation. Their brain is changing, their worldview is changing, their relationships are changing, and it's important to create a lot of opportunities to talk to them and just be curious about their world, right? Don't preach to them, don't tell them what they should do. I mean, as a parent you need to do that, but specialists say that unless you are with them in that emotional world in which they are, your preaching just is wasted, because they will not listen to you, they will not do what you want them to do. But if you get closer to them and you talk to them and you show that you're curious without judging and criticizing and telling them that they do all these mistakes, then you can create a gate, you know, an openness in which they may be able to listen more to you. And if you're interested, there are many interesting books written by Marshall Rosenberg. I'm going to write the name in the chat. He is the author of Nonviolent Communication, and his method is amazing for children as well, working with teenagers. And he has some videos. He's very famous for this method of nonviolent communication, where he talks about the language of the heart, and how he used this method in conflict situations, in war situations around the world. But it's a technique that can also be used in intimate and family relationships. So thank you for your question, and I'm going to, okay, through your question. So what can you do if you're always on the giving end? I think that if you're always on the giving end, it's very important to create the opportunity for an open-hearted discussion with the other person or the other persons. Some people by personality, they are more giving, right? They want to please others, and they want to make them feel good. But that can turn into something that becomes painful, because if we keep giving and don't receive back, right, we deplete our inner resources and we don't feel very happy in the relationship. We don't feel a good state of mental health. We may find meaning in our act of giving. So I think it's important to have a discussion and to reflect on the many different ways in which, you know, you keep giving, and to ask your partner or the person, or as I said, the persons that you speak about, to to explain to them that it's important for you to receive love. Sometimes people are not aware that they don't give love, right? So having that discussion, even when I started doing this research about love, it was not something that we would consciously talk about in the family. You know, how can I show you more love? How can I show you more support? What are your needs? So it's important to let the other person know what your needs are. And because otherwise, when we keep giving and giving, we build up resentment, right? And resentment eats away at a love relationship, because we are not in a good flow anymore. So thank you for that question. And I will look at a few other questions. I think that we have time for probably two more questions. What is the best mindset at such a tough pandemic period? I'm gonna say that I've heard so many psychologists talking about the importance of working on our inner world in this tough pandemic time. A lot of us were very busy, involved in a lot of different projects that did not mean necessarily that we were in a state of flourishing and of wonderful mental health and of great love and relationship. It's just that we had a sense of certainty about what we were doing, and we were very busily involved in the world of work. And nowadays, because the threat of the virus, we can only control by doing the things that we are supposed to do, like wearing masks and washing and keeping good hygiene and not interacting. So all the things that are now mandatory, we can work a little bit more on our inner state by we can read about books on anxiety, or books on how to increase our well-being, or participate in webinars like this one. Now I know that this is not enough. This is just like a drop in the pond, but sometimes even working with a counselor. Now it's very easy to make appointment, and a lot of people have some kind of insurance that would cover a certain sum from counseling, because it really helps to have another person witness your inner world, right? It's almost like you become empowered by creating a relationship in which someone pays full attention to your emotions. And as you express them, you also become more aware of your emotions, and then you become more empowered to change them, right? You become more able to manage your anxiety. You become better able to manage your tendency for depression, let's say. And sometimes we just have to accept that some days really suck, that some days it's really hard to deal with things, and just feel the emotions that we feel, right? We cannot the more we try to fight our anxiety or our depression, the more it increases. So the best way we can deal with it is, one, looking for help from counselor or coaches or other professionals, talking to friends or intimate relationships, people who we trust, developing mindfulness activities and a good routine of walks and relaxation. What was the other thing? Reading and becoming a little bit more aware of how we can deal with these difficult emotions. So thank you for that question. Okay. So one other question about the individual traumas that become activated by the pandemic trauma. You're asking if this is a positive impact that it brings them to the surface. I would say that for the short term is very painful. It creates a lot of suffering, but that suffering leads to healing and integration, and it makes us be more resilient, more authentic, more loving human beings in the end. Because whenever we have unresolved traumas or negative emotions that we have repressed, we keep ourselves stuck in that unsolved emotional world. When we bring them into the surface, the first stages are very difficult. And we usually need the help of a professional because it's very difficult to deal with them on your own. But once you bring them to the surface, you accept that temporary suffering, and you look for all the help you can get from others. And there is that, I would call it, I wanted to call it hope, but I would call it certainty that at the end of working through individual traumas, we will be in a much better state, and we will experience that, what I call the open-heartedness relationship to the world. So I want to thank you all very, very much for your attention and for your beautiful questions. And I hope we'll have more opportunities to interact. Thank you.
Okay, dear everyone, this was phenomenal, Bianca Briciu. Dear Bianca, thank you so much. This was absolutely amazing. You talked about so many important topics that are essential for our lives. And I know that personally, I will be watching the recording of this webinar over and over and over again. And for everybody who asked, the recording of this webinar will be posted on MCS Language Solutions YouTube channel. Dear participants, thank you so much for taking time and for attending this brilliant webinar. I really want to thank also our amazing training coordinator, Amal, for her support. Dear attendees, once again, if you would like to get in touch with Bianca directly, you can email her directly through her website, emotionalbalance.ca. Once again, emotionalbalance.ca. Of course, you can always email our training department at training@mcis.on.ca. And once again, let me repeat, there were many questions that I received and even emails during this webinar. The recording of the webinar will be posted by Friday on the MCIS Language Solutions YouTube channel. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time. Stay strong and healthy and have a wonderful and loving holiday season. Thank you, and thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy your holidays.